Right, after last week's excitement of the waves and the wind and all that malarkey, I thought I'd do something a bit different this week, so we're going a bit more theoretical and a bit more structured. Um, I've been looking at chiaroscuro, I think it's pronounced, which is Italian for, I think it's on the email, but I think it's a definition of light and dark. And it's used by many painters and artists, obviously throughout history, as you can see by the picture I've attached to the email. So the Vermeer, to accentuate dark and light. Okay, and if you saw my quote about the letting the tone do the work and the colour gets the glory, I think the point is there that a lot of the time with something like this, people just chuck colour at it and hope for the best. And I'm sort of saying, well, one thing we should do is look more at the tone of an object, and with this drawing technique, the chiaroscuro technique, you can see how the light and the darks coordinate to produce something three-dimensional, which is more effective. And once we harness that as a skill and we understand it better because we practice it, then you can introduce colour into it, and then you can get more realism into your form. So it's a bit drier this week, it's not as exciting, but I hope it'll help you and give you more confidence to build up more three-dimensional forms with your drawing and painting techniques. So we're gonna look at an apple, and I'm gonna do a sort of breakdown of it, and some of it will be explanation, some of it will be, when the boring bits, if you like, I'll go through with the time lapse, and hopefully I'll keep coming back to it and break it down. And once we've done one, you can do an apple in your own studios or something like that. Then we can try the same technique with some different objects. So now you should be looking at the sheet of paper. It's always difficult to demonstrate and talk at the same time, so I'll try my best. But for this object, I think we're going to blow it up into a larger scale because it will make it easier to get the tone on. So I'm drawing a very loose, rough circle, okay, and then a sphere for the shadow. Okay, it's kind of rough at the first place. Now, one thing I've done before with other people is sometimes when you're looking at something spherical or round, you can sort of break it down to give it a more three-dimensional effect by looking at, by think of it as a globe or something like that. So here, because the apple's on an angle, I'm going to sort of put in a sort of central line, which shows that the angle that it's lying over. So instead of being upright, it's on its side. And then, like before, we put this sort of indicated roughly where the centre was of the stalk or the flowers in the context we did before. So we put the general line, then we give an indication of where that is. And then with imagine it was a globe, you've got like your equator and your tropics, okay? And these, in this very loose form, just give you an idea of where the shapes are of the round object. And then you can put sort of almost like, I think these are lines of latitude or longitude, I can't remember which ones. And then you start to see a basic form. Now that's just to help you draw the actual apple as such, or the spherical object, okay? Now that's not that important with this light and dark technique, but it just gets us, if you apply those principles and you break down a sort of a round object into a sort of sphere or globe, then it helps you sort of appreciate, that's a stalk if you like, you know, when you're plotting out where it is and how it lies. Okay, so now we've kind of done that, and we're roughly yeah, everything's kind of loosely where we want it to be. So we've got two we've got a round kind of shape here and a round-ish shape here. We're going to then apply charcoal or dark pencil, whatever you have, to the major shapes. So this is called adding on, because we're adding, and if we get further into this, we can reduce things back by taking away, subtracting. So this is an adding on technique, and if we're rubbing out, it's called a subtracting technique. So I'm now going to start drawing this, and then I'll probably revert to a time lapse, and you'll sort of see it build up, and I'll keep coming back and talking about where we are. So the first thing I'm going to do is very loosely kind of charcoal in the major kind of shadows. And again, I'm just, because I'm concentrating this, if you're looking at your apple, you can see following that line of the longitude, latitude, can't remember which one it is, so I've got a bump underneath here, just going to move that. You've got this crescent shape. Okay, so they're your first things. Now, if you don't mind, you can get right in there and sort of work it quite hard with your finger tips. Okay, if you don't like using fingertips and you want to keep roughly clean, you can use this. You can use a cloth or something. Then we're going to think where the highlight is. So the highlight, or R, is kind of roughly here. So you want to leave this white, certainly that area, and work tonally into this. So first of all, I'd start by sort of applying a next layer of tone. Now I think if you're using charcoal, it's going to be easier if you do use your fingers and kind of manipulate it in, so to speak. So you're kind of hands-on, getting right in there. Okay, I think now what I'll do is, I think you can all draw using charcoal, is build up layers of dark. So again, I want to work into this more and get more darkness in here. And again, going to build that up. And then build up layers over here. Bearing in mind that subtracting, I want to keep that area white. Okay, and graded in. So that's a mistake, so take that out. We'll get you messy. Now another thing we can do, so I'm going to keep going back to my shapes, keep correcting, and if you're not happy with it, so if you go over, if it goes kind of out, you can take bits out, subtract. Okay, so what you're getting now is you're looking at your object and you're getting nice basic forms of the major shadow, and you're starting to put in more layers of tone. Right, I've finished a time lapse, and I hope you saw the kind of technique was jumping about and using lots of tone. Now what I did also, just before you came back to listen or to this bit of the video, is I put on a bit of colour. Now the point being with the quote that the tone does all the work and the colour takes the glory. Well, you can see quite clearly you add a bit of colour and it suddenly transforms into a real object as such. It feels, real. But the point being, if you work on the tone first, you can get the tonal effect and the three-dimensional qualities of the objects, the apple, but then just adding a bit of colour right at the end gives it, sort of transforms it into that kind of three-dimensional shape. So right, that was a demonstration with the apple. Now the main thing is to work heavily with the tone, and if you want to, add a bit of colour on right at the end. But what I hope you can see, is apart from in fact I've drawn a bit of a strange shaped apple, is the lines I laid down earlier, you know, these kind of lines of longitude or whatever we want to call them, you can almost still see them in the final product, in the final image. So the point is they help you, they kind of guide you when you're shading, kind of work with the three-dimensional feeling of the actual object itself. So I'm sort of shading kind of in these directions, which kind of goes with the form, rather than sort of cross-hatching side to side, which, you know, you can try. But if you do things like that, if you kind of do that sort of thing, then what you notice is the quality of those lines is strong, so that it's just as equally valid a way of doing it, but because the line strength is so strong, it kind of detracts from the actual object we're painting. So whereas if they're sort of blended into the shape of the object, then they sort of disappear more. Now also what I did as well is I put a sort of horizontal line here, because it allowed me to build up shade on the against the light part of the object, so kind of, you know, more or less over here. So without that, if we put something white there, it's not as dramatic. There's less, you know, kind of three-dimensional drama, if you like. So it's helpful. And again, with these shades, we're working in the shape of the object itself. So it's quite a good technique to get into when you're doing this sort of stuff, is to think of the actual object shape. So that's why when we started drawing it up, I broke it down into, because it was a globe type shape, I broke it down into what I said, you know, the lines of Capricorn, Cancer and the equator and longitude and latitude, because it just helped it break down. So we think we try and use techniques to sort of accentuate the shape, and our lines and our structure. Now, I know this is all a bit sort of long-winded just to do an apple, but I hope you can see that the overall effect is, with the increased intensity of the shade and light, which we can break back even more, it really boosts the three-dimensional qualities of the object. So hence the whole purpose of today's exercise is to look at shade, accentuating darkness and light, and then perhaps adding a bit of colour just to add a bit more realism to what you're trying to do. So I've probably asked you already to watch this first and then replay it and try it, so that'll take up a fair chunk of the time. But then when everybody's kind of done this part, I'll post some new objects and we can try it again, but with different objects, to really kind of work on these skills. Okay, so the rest will be done by emails and so on, like normal, but I hope it wasn't too long-winded to sort of explain the process. Thanks.